Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this TechMeet, and thank you very much to Emma as well, who I'll introduce briefly. And for those of you who haven't joined TechMeet before, we like to keep it quite informal, covering topics that are either of interest or useful to people. So always, if you have any kind of input on suggestions, then please do send them through to us. And please do utilise the chat or raise your hand, any reactions, things like that. We be as interactive as possible. So, yeah, please do participate if you can in that. So, welcome to today's TechMeet. You must think I'm really weird, which was quite an interesting, and yeah, I'll let you explain more of that, Emma. I won't go into that, but yeah, a bit of an unusual title to TechMeet compared to what we usually have. And just a bit of housekeeping, and like I said, the recording will be going on to the NTDC website and YouTube channel, and kind of shared within our network of technicians and technical managers. Please do use the chat box, and any feedback, questions, anything like that, and do pop them in and we'll try to get everything covered. And then follow up. If there's anything that you want to suggest or any kind of collaboration, or you want to be put with anyone from the call, any networking opportunities like that, drop me an email. I'll pop it in the chat shortly. And once I get started, and you can drop me an email or email the NTDC and we'll see what we can do. So just before I introduce Emma, we have just released our next TechMeet, which is on education technical professionals. We recently released a report around this, around a new pathway that we've developed in collaboration with loads of universities across the UK. And so it'd be really great for people to join in and kind of hear from some of the ETPs, we're calling them, and celebrating the work of the people within that working group. Anyway, without further ado, just to introduce our speaker, Emma Storey from Nottingham Trent University. And Emma's really involved in networks, and you probably recognise Emma's name, and if not face, quite active in our NTAM network, which is the network for technical apprentice managers. Yeah, and Emma, I will stop sharing now and I'll let you get started. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you very much, Savannah. It's a wonderful opportunity. What I realised, Savannah, is that I cannot see myself. I cannot see my listeners. And so without then not being able to click between slides. So if there is anything in the chat, or if anybody wants to ask a question midway, are you able to prompt that for me?
Yeah, that's fine. If people want to pop in the chat, and I'll just kind of interrupt you, if that's okay.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much. So yes, I will explain the title of this talk in a moment. So yes, I'm here to talk to you today about my experiences of being a late diagnosed autistic woman working in the field of STEM. My name is Emma Storey. I'm a technical specialist. I'm the Apprenticeship Development Officer for the School of Science and Technology, and I'm a qualified coach. So a little context and a content warning for what I'm going to speak about today. I want to say that these experiences are entirely my own. And by that, I mean that I am not an NDV professional, and autism is not my special interest. In fact, I'm quite avoidant of autistic and neurodivergent resources. My mum will say, oh, you need to watch so-and-so, or did you read so-and-so? And I find myself kind of, I don't know, there's a barrier there for me. I feel that those resources are created for neurotypical people to have a better understanding of neurodivergent people. So I tend to not to engage with such things, but that then means that I'm maybe not fully conversant with the specific language, specific descriptions, specific labels, etc. So that's why I'm saying this is entirely my own expression of myself. And so if I cause any offence, I'd love people to tell me why that was, and I can improve my practice. But that's just a little bit of background there. And there is a tiny reference to suicidality that if I hadn't have included, it wouldn't have given quite the weight of my experience. And so that is there. So my goal for this talk really is to potentially spark recognition in people. And I mean that by people who are neurodivergent or consider themselves to be. They feel that they live in these certain ways. They're also for managers, perhaps, and colleagues of NDB colleagues, because it may spark for them a greater little bit of understanding about the neurodivergent conditions. So it has a broad thing. It's just that kind of thing. I've gone to a couple of talks where I've developed better language about my own experience. And if that helps somebody today, then my goal is complete. So I thought I'd talk about the obstacles I faced, but just delivering this talk, actually. I'm recently recovering from a burnout period that I didn't realise I was in until March, and I'd been it since January. And interestingly, when Savannah and I talked about doing this talk, and when she got in touch with me to say, do I want to do this? I was right in the middle of that burnout. And there was a moment where I thought, am I really in the place for this right now? But I decided that I was. There is some internalized ableism I have here, where I feel some aspects of thinking, do I have a right to speak about things like this? Is my voice relevant here? There's all kinds of complicated levels in there. And also some task paralysis. I find myself, although this is commonly more related to people with ADHD, I do experience task paralysis, and that is very much linked with rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which again is typically an ADHD experience, but I also experience it as well, and my perfectionism as well. So lots of things got in the way of making me start these slides, and I wrote them on Thursday, which is late doors, but I couldn't get myself past these obstacles until then. So I discovered that I'm autistic in 2017, and I was 42. My diagnosis came as a kind of a sort of a roundabout route, really, and I'll speak about that in a moment. But what I then had to sort of come to terms with was how I present as a working parent, how I presented as a learner, how I present as a colleague, and how I present as a direct report. Basically, my entire history was challenged. My understanding of myself was completely slid into a different view, a different lens. I experienced a level of grief where I felt that I wanted to re-experience a lot of things that had happened to me over the years, where I knew that I hadn't been in full understanding of myself and therefore struggled in many ways. And so that was a difficult time in itself. But so 2017, we are, I can't do the maths, 8 years in, and I'm still evolving and still learning. And in many ways, really, have only come into my own recognition of my autism in the last year or two. In many ways, I sat in some denial in some ways. So it's been a journey. So, okay, what do I mean by really weird? This came up very specifically, actually, during my recent burnout. What I find is that when I am in burnout, my capacity to mask is much, much reduced. And I said to people at the time, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I felt that I was extra autistic. I felt increasingly unable to communicate, lots of mutism, lots of going home and absolutely crashing into pure silence, being intolerant of anything I had to do that wasn't necessary, complete avoidance of people, key people, in fact, didn't want to, in many ways, was withdrawing from even my partner. And I go to a choir, and choir has been absolutely gold for me over the last year. And I started to not even want to go to choir. So my feelings that I was like neon lit weird was how I was experiencing that at the time. And my fear, whilst I was feeling extra autistic, was that people could see more, that there's something a little off about me in the way I communicate, the way I don't communicate, the way I show up, the way I don't show up. And I say inconsistency here because on a good day, when I was able to mask, you wouldn't know that there was anything curious about me, perhaps. I would be vibrant, I would be chatty, I would be able to communicate, I'd be able to look you in the eye, I'd be able to talk nonsense. But then that could quickly slip into me being unable to look you in the eye. I wouldn't even want to be in your company. And that I felt that I was so perceivable that I just felt really weird. Maybe I don't know if anybody can relate to that. I'd love to hear people's reflections on that, but that was what I meant by really weird. So once I realized I was autistic, I had to sort of look back over my experiences of being a learner. So I'm talking about all the way back in school. And one of my very first experiences of knowing that I take things literally when people say them was when I was in primary school. So I was late for school one day, and I could only get into the school via a classroom. And On entering the classroom, the teacher said, "What are you late for?" And I said, "School." Now, the entire class laughed at me, the teacher mocked me, but I'd answered the question asked. She wanted to know why I was late, but she didn't ask that question. And it's my very first memory of going, aha, this is how my brain works. So that was my experience, my very first experience in the school arena of being autistic. Had lots and lots of social and emotional struggles as a school pupil, falling out with friends all the time, total intolerance for the subtleties, the unspoken rules, the various things that aren't immediately apparent to an autistic person, just made me struggle all the time. And it will have taken my focus away from academic learning. I've been so obsessed with how I was being perceived, how I was connecting with others, what other people thought of me, that it completely distracted me from study. And that's where I say about focus and organisation. I was, I think, continuously and overwhelmed, basically, and therefore unable to really engage fully with school, and was seen to be slack, seen to be lazy, seen to be chit-chat, a distraction, just somebody kind of was slightly erased in many ways because of this way I had of being. And in the wider context of learning, I just went along with everything. Didn't specifically think about what my GCSE choices might be, just wandered along, didn't have wider ideas about what I could be, what my career could be, because it just didn't fit in my brain. I just didn't have that broader idea of what being educated meant to me and where it could take me. So it was just a passenger throughout the whole experience. So then realizing I was autistic and what that had meant as me being an employee, again, taking things literally and being highly rule bound had been really problematic for me. And again, subtexts and inferences that other people understand without having things needing to be explained to them. I experienced management clashes over different values where, for me, what was important was fairness, and that other people's key values were the business need. And I found that really difficult to align my need for fairness with what was sometimes some really difficult business decisions that had to be made. And I became very close to losing my job at one point, or feeling that I had to leave my job because I couldn't get over these difficulties. However, once I had my diagnosis and was able to share this with my manager, they were able to have a different view of me and a different view of what they'd seen in me. That behaviours that they thought were problematic, they could actually see were ultimately from a good place in me, and that were also able to see the traits of me that were part of my autism that were highly, highly valuable and really effective as well. So a sort of an understanding was developed and compromise was achieved. I've also had cycles of poor mental health. I can count 4 times where I've been away from work for at least 4 months at a time. So long-term sickness absence has been a real problem for me. And it wasn't until I heard differing language 2 years ago to talk about, no, it was the beginning of last year, about being neurodiverse, was that I had been experiencing autistic burnout. I hadn't had depression. It wasn't anxiety. I'd had autistic burnout. And once I had that language, I was able to sort of reframe what my sickness absence record means, that it wasn't within my control. I wasn't being intentionally problematic, although I really felt that I was. But I do wear my sickness absence record as I do hold it as a point of shame. I've yet to manage to coach myself out of that attitude around that. It's difficult for me. I felt like I missed such a lot of time. I let such a lot of people down. So it's a real continuing problem for me. And I feel that I'm almost seen as a less safe pair of hands in case I can't cope with certain situations. So it's a scar in me that has yet to heal. And then as being an autistic working parent, so it wasn't until my children were being assessed for autism that I gained a private diagnosis for my own autism. So I would not have had this if my children weren't going through their experiences. So I have children with complex needs, a variety of ways in which their autism impacts them socially, emotionally, academically, in so many ways. They have had enormous struggle. And I know that everything is not linear, and different people's capacity or comprehension of what struggle might be will be different. And I know that there are situations that are far worse than mine, but it has been traumatic. It has been trauma. There is trauma. And just deeply impacting, has continuous impact even now. And we navigated what I considered to be the harmful territory of mainstream school. Our schools weren't prepared for or able to support my children's specific needs. And I had to make some really difficult decisions and took my children out of school when I knew that it was no longer safe for them to be there. We were supported by social services, which has its own stigma. We were supported by CAMS. The schools threatened to prosecute us, which really put me in a very difficult mental space. And my children have experienced and do experience continually, and even now, suicidality, where they don't feel that they are valuable members of society because of how it is that they can't do what mainstream society expects of them, and they have such emotional struggle. As an employee, this was just really, really difficult to navigate. How to continue to show up at work with all this going on in background. It had sort of led me to feel a lot of stuckness, so distracted by my home life that being at work and trying to show up as I wanted to, be as impactful as I wanted to, was just really, really difficult. That sickness absence would still occur because I would experience burnouts continuously. And I felt untransferable. I didn't feel like I could take my version of me to another employer and say, hello, this is my experience, I'd need this kind of flexibility. And this was in 2017. I'd like to think, and I'm pretty sure, that things would be different now, that people would hear stories about people managing neurodivergence in their lives and have a different attitude. But I felt that I couldn't move anywhere. I couldn't take myself to other places. I recently had a conversation with a colleague who also has neurodivergent children, and I was trying to, please believe that you are transferable and that you can take your experience elsewhere and ask for the flexibilities that I never thought I could. I think it's really important that that possibility is still open to people. And I have several failure stories around all of this. It is a complex thing that has led me to be the person that I am today. Something I'd want to add then here is to bust biases, and this is why, if you were to have a person come to you as part of a recruitment process and share with you that they are a parent or carer of neurodivergent individuals, because I can tell you this, these are the soft skills that I certainly have and that typical parents and carers of neurodivergent people will have because of the arenas they've experienced from day one. Managing their child's needs and navigating and negotiating with professionals and professional systems. And I would say that we're highly resourceful, resilient, incredible problem solvers, being able to see a situation as presented and think very quickly around it to create a solve. Excellent negotiators. This comes from negotiating with schools and professional services about your needs for your child, the advocacy that you develop to be able to get the support that your child needs. Typically you don't, but you certainly fight for it anyway. And in that same way, we are creative, dynamic, and highly empathic people. We have to be able to shift. We have to be able to think of different pathways and different methods to beat the system and also help our children to be able to cope with the system. We are highly pressure tolerant because we live with it every day, and we're enormously loyal as well. We have to be loyal to our children. So our loyalty is, I would propose, is expanded by our experience in this arena.
Emma?
Yes?
I'm just going to jump in now just because we've got quite a few comments in not so much questions, but just comments that I think would be kind of interesting just to read through. Okay. And then save your voice for a minute.
Yes.
So just one from John that says, having been through 2 periods of burnout recently, and off the back of that, working out I'm autistic and probably ADHD, I can totally relate to the extra autistic thing. Also, the way that batteries suddenly fail and become semi-functioning. That was a key thing you're saying, that it's almost shut down.
Yeah.
And then Lawrence says literal instructions and sickness is something I have experienced. I know Lawrence and I have had conversations about how best to communicate with one another, and which has actually been really helpful in terms of our working relationship. So that's been great. And then Lisa, since both sons have dual ADHD, ASD diagnosis, I've realised that my bouts of depression may be related to undiagnosed ASD, ADHD, rather than depression. But luckily, working in engineering, I fit right in.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the comments that have come through. I think
you.
The key thing as well that I would take from that was feeling untransferable, which I've actually not heard anybody say before. And I think that's probably quite useful for people who aren't experiencing this themselves and are neurotypical, as far as they're aware, to consider. Yeah,
I'd like to think so, definitely, because it will be an internalized shame and an internalized barrier that people feel that their experience and their package that they are isn't something that employers want to embrace, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. So I thought that was really useful for people to take away and kind of into their workplaces. And then Lawrence, of course you can comment if you want to jump off.
Yeah, I'm relating. Everything you're saying, Emma, is sort of consonant with my own experiences. And like you, as someone that has suspected for about 5 years that I'm not just intense and anxious, which was the label I attached to my own sort of psychology. It helps that I have a wife that's actually in mental health in the NHS, and she sort of pushed me to look at this. And I've just turned 60, and I was diagnosed just before my 60th birthday with elements of ASD and, funnily enough, ADHD, which hadn't occurred to me. But the literal instructions thing, Savannah's touched upon it. I have to say to people in my workplace, look, if you need me to do something, say it, bullet point, make unambiguous statements, because I am terrible at reading between the lines. And I know in the past, when I think back, Emma, and I won't hog the conversation here, I can remember a conversation 20 years ago in Edinburgh where an old landlord of mine got really frustrated with me because I was trying to get him to say something in unambiguous terms. And I don't think he could appreciate, and I get this, because 20 years ago we weren't talking about it. He just thought I was being really pedantic, I think. Yes. Yeah, and he was saying, look, Lawrence, you're making me angry. And there's so much more I could say, but it's not my talk. So I'll just say a couple of other things. One is that I've always, pre and post diagnosis, I've always been described as detail orientated. This is something that's come through it in commenting on my sort of discharge of duties in various jobs throughout the UK, but also I've worked in America. And when I was in America, I was told that you're a fantastic problem solver, Lawrence. You work really well as an individual, but you're not a very good team player. And it's things like this, Emma, that since my diagnosis, in fact, before my diagnosis, when putatively I thought, you know what, I think this is me, that I've started to reevaluate what's going on now and things that have been said about me and things I've done in the past. And I'll shut up by saying that many of us will just talk in black and white terms and won't necessarily understand the subtleties of the political rules in the workplace. And I'm going to be honest, over the years, that has got me into trouble. Even in my job as a professional registration mentor, I've had my wrist slapped by the Science Council for saying things and doing things without permission, because I just thought, this is a good thing to do, so I'm going to do it, not realizing that there's a process that you have to adhere to. You have to ask to do things. And it never occurred to me, and it didn't make sense,
Yeah. I've actually had people tell me that I'm underhand, actually, in that very same way, where I've gone about doing a thing that I think is absolutely perfectly reasonable to do, behaving what I think is perfectly correct, and it has caused trouble. And so, yes, I completely can.
Yeah, I totally get that, Emma. I totally get that. And there's been situations with the NTDC versus the Science Council in the last 3 years where, because of my enthusiasm, my passion, my focus and my desire just to get things done, I've gone ahead and I've set things up thinking this is great for the cause, for the technician commitment, not realizing or not appreciating that basically there's politics to this, and you have to ask people if you can do it, you know.
Totally right.
Yeah,
totally right.
Right, I'll shut up now.
Okay, thank you very much for your reflections. They're really valuable. Okay, so I've dropped this slide in basically because I want to have, I just had like the opportunity to do it every time. This is Pat, who is my gran. She really has been, like I say, the saver of my spoons. She lives 4 doors from me, and took it upon herself to basically be my house fairy a long time ago, and supports me domestically in so many ways that I know that if it hadn't have been for her, I would definitely have crumbled many more times and for much longer. She's been poorly recently, so I really wanted to make sure I held space for her. So she has been an absolute champion for me. Let me continue. Okay, so when things started to shift, I was lucky enough to be accepted on the Aurora program that was being run by my university at the time, and was able to start to basically self-reflection. Hadn't really understood its value before then, and really opening myself up to coaching skills and how you can coach yourself and how you can begin to grow out of the limiting stories that hold you back. So that was a group coaching arena, and so really it started a little spark in my mind about what the coaching could do for me. And the shifts that I speak about here is that I got into contact with my autistic self finally after 6 years. I had been in denial. I had some internalized ableism around my autism. It hasn't necessarily been met well by my family, and so I did sort of detach myself from my neurodivergence, and I think there was some shame around it in many ways. And there was a talk, like I said, where I was able to find the language that and be proud of the person that I am, and know that many aspects of myself and my personality are very much as a result of my autism, and that are incredibly valuable. So that's really only very recently that has come to me. And as a result of that, last year I chose emergence as my word of the year, and that I wanted to rebrand myself. And I had a coach for myself who I told I wanted to shift my brand at work, move past the labels that I have of being that unsafe pair of hands, and somebody that can't necessarily be turned to for all things that perhaps need doing. But the pitfall of emerging is that I have become an inadvertent overachiever. So I'll tell you more about that in a moment. I also did a coaching apprenticeship. I qualified last September, and it has been absolutely revolutionary for me. And I've realised I didn't know if I had a special interest. I've never been bothered about cars or trains or things like that. But for me, people are my special interest. I am obsessed with how people communicate, how they show up, what their stories are. And so being a coach allows me into people's lives to really look at what makes a person tick. And so being a coach has really been fabulous for that. It has made use of my highly attuned observation skills. There's a skill for coaching, which is where you look for nonverbal cues and something called energy shifts. And because being an autistic person, an undiagnosed autistic person, I've always been very careful at surveying the safety of any situation that I am. So I will look for subtleties, shifts in tiny things, tones of voice, expression, shoulder position, physical, hand movements and things like that for my own safety. And so that as a skill when I'm coaching people, that will often be tells as to what their internal experience that doesn't necessarily match their external experience, has been a real, it was a skill I'd already got. So I didn't need to grow it, but I've certainly been able to capitalize on it. Looking for the untold story, as I say, and being an empath, because I've had some really difficult experiences in my life, and I would do anything to make sure that other people don't struggle in the ways that I have. And so those are my key skills that have made coaching absolutely joyful for me. So I've also had the opportunity to become the Apprenticeship Development Officer at the university, which is a great, in School of Science Technology, which has been a great honour, and it is where I've been able to use coaching to grow apprentices, and being able to pull on my needs to widen participation, and just really being able to get into communication with my coachees, with the apprentices, and know the struggles or the subtleties that might be impacting their professional experience. And I was awarded Coaching Apprentice Champion of the Year by a local learning provider for doing this, which is a great achievement. I've also, on completing my apprenticeship, was awarded Coaching Professional of the Coaching Professional Apprentice of the Year, but also Apprentice of the Year by my training provider, DBC Training. What an incredible honour, what an incredible top of mountain moment. And I know that I have had life-changing impact on the people that I've coached. The phrase I include here of coach thyself, I've been thinking about this a lot over these last 3 months of my struggle, where I did struggle to coach myself out of the difficulty I was experiencing. But I believe that I did. I just didn't necessarily have the patience to think it was happening in the time frame I wanted it to. So yes, what do I mean about being an overachiever? And so in my year of emergence last year, I took every opportunity I could to achieve recognition, to achieve excellence, to be seen in a successful light, as opposed to what I'd considered to be low success, just continuous challenge, continuous, I can't do that. So almost becoming over-identifying really with success and recognition, because it became so important to me to be viewed differently. That rebranding that I was talking about, so important. And a variety of the images here are ways in which I gained recognition, but also how that did lead to the burnout I've experienced in the last 3 months, because I almost, as I would have a success, and then life would go back to normal, and I would struggle with that normality, and I would then be craving the next success. So it's a story in me which is around being recognized. It's around being seen in the light I want to. It's my struggle with what I perceive as rejection or being a failure. So there's so many layers to this, and I'm taking this to my coach in my next session, because it's a while since I've spoken to her, and so I want to explore that a little bit more on how I can create shifts in this experience I'm having. So my current challenges are the perception of me, again, this period of really weirdness, how it is that I can recognize what that means and move past it. I also know that this recent burnout has shaped me, has remodeled me, has given me information, and knowing that is almost making me more accepting of periods of burnout, because I feel it is information that's coming from inside me to tell me something needs to change. One of my key struggles at the minute is coping with normality, and this might sound really strange. So I spoke to you about how my children have struggled, but we've come to a period of settledness. They are okay, and they've been okay for a bit of time now. But for me, trusting that this new arena, having been decades of living in fear and anticipation of problems and struggle, for me this has been really complicated. My identity has been entirely wrapped up in my own autism and my children's autism, and so what my current identity is has been really difficult for me to understand. I feel like I can't stand down from all the difficulty we've experienced, and so again, that's something I need to recognize and coach myself through. Also, having the understanding that I'm a carer, I never really thought about the fact that I am, and getting support from the Carers Association. That's something that's upcoming for me. And my menopause, the intersection of menopause and neurodivergence is really additionally complex, and is having its own expressions of challenge for me as well. But what are my current positive projects? Well, there's the being neurodivergent is driving me to support other neurodivergent people. So one of the things I'm working on at the minute is creating better support for neurodivergent students to lab spaces. We've created the Neurodiversity Cafe, which is an informal drop-in for neurodivergent staff to have a safe space to just be, basically. And I'm looking towards gaining some coaching CPD around neurodivergence as well to improve my practice. And so that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening. I wonder if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's always great to hear from you. And yeah, really, really valuable. I think a lot of the perspectives, I guess, of being a parent of children with, with additional needs and what that means in terms of you as an employee as well. Really quite unique perspective in that sense. So I'll just read through some of the comments in the chat that have come through. And then if people do want to jump off and ask any questions, have any discussions, then please do. Emma, I don't know if you want to stop presenting and then you can...
Sure.
And most people probably have their cameras off because obviously you couldn't see us anyway. But it sometimes is better for people. So a comment from Lisa, I have to have things written down as I just have no working memory. Now my problems, note taking in the 90s during my degree make more sense to me.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then a comment from Stephen, the complications caused by brilliant long-term memory while having zero working memory are so difficult. And I think if people around you aren't understanding that as well, it can, like we've discussed, cause problems. Lawrence, as the Elizabethan historian Francis Bacon once quipped, knowledge is power. I believe that was around the time you were discussing your apprenticeship. Is that correct, Lawrence? Coaching?
Sorry, I don't quite understand, Savannah. This could be an example, actually, of neurodiverse communication. What have you just asked me?
You left a comment saying, as the Elizabethan historian Francis Bacon once quipped, knowledge is power.
What did I mean by that?
I was wondering what it referred to, yeah.
Yeah, it's something that Emma's talked about, and that when people get a formal diagnosis, it really helps them in the sense that they now realise they aren't just weirdos, that actually there is something that basically can explain why they are the way they are. And then you, as Emma was saying, you look back and you think, oh, that's why I did that. And it is. I think it is empowering to know that you are neurodiverse. And so many people that I've spoken to in the last 3 years since I've come into this have said that since my diagnosis, I'm far less unsure and far less confident about who I am. I'm not a weirdo. I'm not a weirdo. And furthermore, there are other people out there that fit this sort of diversity description. What is it? 1 in every 30 on average, and considerably higher, I would suggest, in technical jobs that are the same, So that's really what I meant by that, Savannah.
Perfect, thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, and I think like kind of coming back to that knowledge is power, something that we've run quite a few of these sessions, probably like at least 1 or 2 a year, kind of in different formats and at different events now. And it's been really interesting to have so many different people inputted into the conversation. But one thing that people have said, which kind of relates to both what everybody's really saying today, is that not only did they feel kind of liberated by it, but a sense of relief, almost like they could exhale and their shoulders drop in. And I think that's a really key thing there.
Truly, yes.
And then a comment from Lisa, oh yes, menopause seems to have heightened my quotes too and made it more difficult to mask, or less bothered about masking, maybe. And I think, not to sidetrack onto a completely different topic here, but there is a network. I know, Lisa, you're in Sheffield Uni as well, where we're based. There was a network and there's quite a lot of conversation going on around menopause. So it might be something that there's a bit more awareness of, and it gets brought a bit more into conversation for people, because obviously that affects a good proportion of employees as well. And then Jackie, I identify with every single thing you've said. So yeah, that's good to hear. John.
Hello, yeah. So I came into my to my role. It was originally a technical role, and it's become increasingly management, and working out my neurodiversity has kind of helped me to kind of realise that the things that make me a really good technician are probably related to that. I'm leave me alone with a problem that kind of just like to focus on, and I'll find you the solution. But the way that career progression has pushed me is pushed me into a situation where those same neurodiverse characteristics have actually made it something that I really struggle with. So I'm actually in the process of leaving my job because I think I'm well suited to the job I was originally recruited to, but it's become a job that I don't think I can do and be myself. So I think it's there's that recognition that there are things about neurodiversity that can be a superpower as a technician, but also come with some challenges.
Do you know, that is so fascinating, and I think I'm looking back to the tipping point between becoming from being a technician to becoming a manager, and knowing that really was where my neurodivergence really did become more obvious and amplified, actually. Obviously, it's still undiagnosed at the time, but you're absolutely right. And it's the Peter Principle, isn't it? Where you're great at a job, and so you have been then being put into being a leader or a manager in a role. And yes, indeed, where how your capacities to human influence your capacity to lead people are thrown into stark relief. So that's just, and I'm so sorry that you feel like you need to lead, but I really hope then you're going back to your passion and your roots, and you're going to feel more comfortable and find more success.
I'll also just add to that, kind of on a sector-wide perspective, is that a lot of people will know a lot of people that go into technical roles and have those skills and potentially have the traits that make that their perfect pathway, do find in terms of career pathways that, a lot of the only routes are car management, and at which point they lose a lot of the appeal. The role loses the appeal to them because it's not a technical role anymore. It's based around, like you say, management and leadership, and looking at different ways to do that. So yeah, I think maybe that could be something that we open up to a wider conversation about, looking into that, because it's one thing for neurotypical technicians to have that frustration of losing those key skills, but if the way that your brain works really works well there and it doesn't work well in other ways, and like your position, John, where you're having to leave your career, that's not really something that's sustainable for, like, what did you say, Lawrence, 1 in 30 people? So maybe that's something that at the centre we could look at kind of opening up a conversation around. The
title's already come to me, and it is Surviving Leadership as a highly skilled technician. It's being able to manage the shift it is to being a leader from being a highly skilled technician. Is, yes, absolutely. There's something there for sure.
Yeah, maybe some kind of training around what can be done around that. Cool. Well, there we go, everyone. There's our next idea in. So stay tuned for that. We'll get it out. Lawrence, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say 1 or 2 things in relation to comments and things that you've said, Emma. I'm really glad, because I say I turned 60 about a month ago. So I started a PhD at Oxford, which, if I'm honest, at the time I blamed everyone else because I was a young, sort of hot-headed guy. But looking back, I can see that the situation that arose that culminated in me being asked to leave, which was not great, and it impacted my career for 2 years. I now realize, and this is where knowledge is power is a good thing, that actually, one, yes, I was culpable in some way. I did screw up. It wasn't just my supervisor, but and this is where brings me on to my next point, that it really, fault is the wrong word, but it really wasn't my fault, because I was obviously somebody who was neurodiverse, and we're talking 1991. And I always say that if you go back that far, the only example that existed in the mainstream media of someone that had that was Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman.
Yes.
So unless you can walk into a library and basically read every book and spout it and have such poor skills that you can't operate in everyday society, in other words, you're not a functional neurodiver, then you can't possibly have it. So I just assumed, look, this is the way I am, and I'm not sure why it is. And one of the things that I'm really glad now is that, and things like this exemplify it, is that it is being recognized. I mean, it's 3% or so of society. The conversation now is, I think, better because, yes, there are struggles that we all have. I'm not a good team player, for instance, and therefore, Emma, I could not have, I think, readily moved to a management role, and that's limited my career. I'm better in an individual role where I need to network and control my own space. But it is great that the conversation now is such that, look, you know, there are real positives about, you know, people who are neurodiverse, to the extent that companies like Google and Microsoft actually look for people with our characteristics in these very sort of techie roles. And one other thing was, it made me smile what Stephen Hale said. It's a bugbear of my wife, is about long-term memory. I did my O-levels, I'm betraying my age here, 40 years ago. I could probably sit them tomorrow and still get straight A's. But I cannot tell you, and this is the God's honest truth, I've lived at my current address for 10 years, and I can tell you now, I still can't remember the name of the street round the corner. And it drives my wife crazy. What do you mean? You've been here 10 years. But I can, you know, I can walk into a church and say, that's a very good example of 14th century architecture. And I've always sort of been aware of the fact that my memory is a little odd, that it's brilliant for certain esoteric facts, but it's appalling for what you might call everyday useful facts. So my wife, without wishing to sound crude, she said, problem with you, Lawrence, is that you've got a head full of shit. You've got all this knowledge, but it has no use in the everyday world. But I would contend it actually is rather useful if you're a technician.
Yes, definitely. I do agree. Yes, there is autistic joy. There is autistic euphoria. We can experience happiness within ourselves. It's important to say that, but despite struggle, I love the person I am. The details I notice about the world and people are fabulous to me, that I know that I wouldn't be that same person without it. And so, yes, I consider it to be a joy.
Well, I think that's a very maybe nice note to actually end on.
Yes.
And if nobody else has any more questions, there's a few more comments just saying thank you. And he did have some good leadership and management courses, and then John plans to move into data science, which you hope will be better suited to how your brain works. Okay. Well, we hope so too, John. Hopefully that's a good move for you, and you can feel more yourself there. Fingers crossed. Well, if there's no more comments, then feel free to go and grab up Lawrence.
Actually, I'm going to do what suits our natures, which is, you've described your job, Emma. So on a related but not strictly related point, I'd like to discuss something with you about your role vis-a-vis what I do with Savannah at NTDC. Okay. If that's okay. I'll drop you a line.
Do. Yeah, I'd be happy to hear it. Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll send through the details that I said I'd put in the chat, but I didn't. I'll pop them through on the follow-up email. So yeah, huge thank you, Emma, and thanks everyone for joining and contributing. And
thank you.
Hopefully get outside and enjoy a little bit of lunch if you can.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Bye.